breaks, so when you need to stretch or your back is killing you, just take care of yourself. But this is not a normal break, so we're going to continue. So we've had some rich suggestions already. One of our goals for this event is when you leave, hopefully we all will have some very concrete, measurable things that we individually can do, but more importantly, we can go back to our churches, our organizations, our spheres of influence, and get this to be more of a corporate effort along with our individual efforts. So we're going to move on now for impacts on education quality. That's going to be the focus for our next few minutes. The bio of Robert Bligh is on the yellow sheet, but I'll say just a few words about him. He's an educator for the whole person. He is currently dedicated to researching, writing, and speaking about, quote, the influence that the quality of a child's life outside school has on academic success, end quote. Mr. Bligh was born in Norfolk, Nebraska. He received a BA degree from the University of South Dakota and his JD from the University of Nebraska College of Law. He's worked in the Nebraska legislature, the Nebraska Association of School Boards, and is a member of the faculty of Dole College. He is published in Nebraska papers and the Washington Post and Chicago's Black Star Project. He's going to be sharing with us more in depth, and then after that, we're going to have time for some small table conversation and some more question and answers. Let's welcome Rob Bligh.
I'm here to thank you for the applause. I always think when I hear applause and I realize it's for me, it makes me think of my grandfather's milk cow and how nervous she was made by a big hand. Sure. You're groaning, but the next chance you get, you're going to use that. The next 40 minutes are going to be very exciting, especially for me, because I'm going to find out whether I can remember any of the things I thought I wanted to say when I designed this slideshow. And if I do remember some of them, maybe this will work out okay, and otherwise I'm going to be very nervous. I wanted to suggest to you that I have 3 objectives today. The first one, of course, is to talk about the topic that I was assigned. The second one is to not say or do anything that will make Professor McKeel regret that he nominated me to come and talk to you guys today. I'm not always good at that. I sometimes don't have a very good off switch on my mouth. The third thing that I want to do is, I always think about this every time I have to get up in front of people. I want to escape this morning with at least one shred of dignity intact. And I'll do my best to try to see to it that that happens. Do we have a slideshow? Oh, maybe. Let's do this. Before we get to the slides, I want to simply go through this and indicate what each of the pages is about. I don't particularly want to talk much about them. Many of the things that are in there are going to be up on the slides. But I wanted to prepare this, and I wanted to thank this organization for being willing to print a fairly expensive booklet so that you can take something home with you. Also, John McKeel has electronic copies of this, so that if you want other copies, you're welcome to them. I don't think anything here is copyrighted, certainly not by me. The second page, handout page 2, is a collection of data concerning free and reduced lunch poverty numbers. and scores on the state test for, let's see, for 15 of our largest districts, and in particular 31 high schools. And essentially, it's an attempt to take a look at what seems to be the connection between family poverty and student success. Because I'm not going to talk to you today about education quality because I don't feel able to do that. But what you see in those schools there is that the schools that have the least fraction of families that are impoverished are the schools that have the highest average scores on the test. They are the successful education institutions. And that's true everywhere in the country. And that data, at least for the high schools, on page 3, is laid out graphically. And essentially describes the same thing that you get when you read the numbers themselves. Page 4 involves something that I discovered, an explanation by Keith Stanovich. Keith Stanovich is a professor up at the University of Toronto, and he tried to express what it meant to have delayed reading skills as a little kid. And we will talk about that, but the point here is that earlier learning affects later learning. Earlier learning is more important than later learning. Early learning determines the success of later learning. They are. Okay. And what do I want you to make them change? Enter will do it? Okay. I want to say something about you guys too. I hope that all of you, when you have the next opportunity to look in a mirror, that you will smile back at yourself. Smile out of pride for the outfit that you all belong to. The fact that you are willing to wrestle with this topic on a Saturday morning when you could be doing other stuff that might be a lot more fun. You guys owe yourself a pat on the back. Okay, let's see if this is going to work. 6 years, let's not talk about that. Hand out materials. There. That's the graph I was talking about. This page and the next page, you will see two really, I think, important things. One is this array of hours that is spent during a child's life from birth to age 18. How many hours are spent in school and how many hours are spent someplace else, particularly during the first 5 years of life. The other thing you will see is a list of guesses, a list of speculations that occurred to me about likely occurrences in the lives of impoverished children. And I can't prove any of them. I simply offer, I don't have any money to do research. All the research I do is found information, and that's what much of what's in this today is. But each of these observations that I make seems to me to be likely to have a negative impact on the lives and the development and the education and the success in school and outside of school of individual children. And I think they are worth thinking about, because I think if you're looking for something concrete to do, if you can pick out a few of these and see to it that for some children those things don't damage their lives, you may be able to do some good. This is a description of a relationship between quality of students and the quality of the academic institution, and I think it has an application for public K-12 schools. I took 2 universities and their undergraduate programs. One is Brown University. Brown University admits about 10% of its applicants. Its median ACT score for incoming freshmen is about 33, meaning that half of their students have scores of 34, 35, or 36. They graduate 86%, at least with the particular year that I was able to dig up, 86% of their students in 4 years. I then put up the similar information about the University of Nebraska Kearney. It has about a 23 median ACT for its incoming freshmen, meaning that half of its incoming freshmen have 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, and so on down to where they finally draw a line. It graduates somewhere slightly above 20% of its freshmen after 4 years. I don't think that that difference is a difference in the quality of the institution. I think that it is a function, a natural function, of the quality of the students that they're able to enroll. I think that if the University of Nebraska Kearney wanted to have the academic reputation of Brown University out on the East Coast, all they have to do is change the quality of the students that they enroll as freshmen. If Brown University had an average quality of freshman class of the quality that UNK has, they would quickly lose their academic shine, their academic polish. And so I'm not trying to say that there's anything good or bad about any of the faculty, good or bad about any of the institutions. I'm simply suggesting to you that there's a lot of data that suggests that academic success is a function of the student, not a function of the institution, even though we don't like to believe that very much. And then I got a quote here. This quote was spoken by a friend of mine, a former colleague. I'm not at Doane College now. I know the notes say that I'm a member of the faculty at Doane. I'm not. I was happy to be there. Doane's track coach had a regular visit to the national championships, indoor championships in Kansas City. And they were very successful, given the fact that it was a 500 student campus, or 600 student campus, or 700 student campus. But they just trashed their performance. The performance was way below expectations at the national championship one year. And Fred Wiley said to the group in the locker room, "I know that this loss today is a bitter disappointment for everyone in this room. I want to assure you all that today's result was all my fault. I take responsibility. I should have recruited better athletes." We don't allow schools to recruit better students, at least the public schools. They have to take what they get. And what they offer those children doesn't vary very much from place to place. But the academic performance of the students does, and it varies based upon poverty. Poverty has an influence, a profound influence on academic results. This is an interesting one. There are 16 teacher training institutions in Nebraska. I don't find that any of them conducts any research, certainly not research like this. This was done with the help of the Omaha Public Schools Research Office. And essentially, I observed that Nebraska gives its NESA exams, its proficiency exams to students, all third graders, all fourth graders, all fifth graders, all sixth graders, all seventh graders, all eighth graders, and all 11th graders. And they do it every year. What that means is that every year there are a group of fourth graders, fifth graders, sixth graders, seventh graders, and eighth graders who took the same test last year. I asked the question, how many of those kids attend Omaha Public Schools? And the number was about 14,000, for which we had 2 consecutive annual scores on the same NESA tests. And I was trying to figure out what it is what the relationship was between how the student has done in the past with predicting how the student will do in the future. And the only way I could think about that, and the way they gave me the information, involved what is called a coefficient of correlation. I'm not a mathematician, but here's what I think a coefficient of correlation means. If you can take any set of numbers describing something, measuring something, and any other corresponding set of numbers, like the first year taking the NESA test and the second year taking the NESA test for each of 14,000 children, you can calculate a number that is above -1 and below +1. That's the formula makes that necessary. And the whole point is that if it's near -1, it means there's a negative correlation. A correlation between how much whiskey you drink and liver health. The more whiskey you drink, the worse your liver health. A negative correlation. A positive correlation might be how much water you drink and kidney health. The more water you drink, with limits, the better your kidneys are going to be. A positive correlation. So what's the correlation here? Was that even close to a decent mathematical explanation? It was. Okay. This is a PhD in math at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and I always ask him my questions about arithmetic. What this shows is that for those 14,000 kids, the number circles 0.8. That's a pretty high correlation. Example. Have any of you noticed that tall parents tend to produce tall adult children? And then shorter parents tend to produce shorter adult children, and then medium-sized parents tend to produce medium-sized children as adults. It's true. As a matter of fact, the correlation among Americans in that one is about 0.8. So the extent to which last year's performance seems to tell us what next year's performance is going to be, poor kids, rich kids, smart kids, dumb kids, white kids, black kids, or any other color of kids, they're all included in that. And it's about 0.8. It means that there's not much room for teachers to make a difference in any particular kid's case. It's another piece of information that, for me, suggests that what happens outside of school is probably profoundly more important, significantly more important than what happens inside of schools, especially when we think about the fact that the schools all have to meet the same standards. They all have to offer the same curriculum. They all have to offer the same qualification of teachers. They all have to have the same number of days and hours in the school year. They all have to, all their kids have to take the state tests and so forth. That from school to school to school, the only real difference you can find in Nebraska public schools is the relative poverty of the students' homes. It makes a difference. I'm not sure I'm remembering what I was talking about what each of these slides was supposed to indicate, but I'm going to keep talking just the same. There is a state senator. He just resigned to become, what was that Mr. Bligh was talking about? A lobbyist. Okay. He was trying to promote a provision that would have made tax money go to what he called charter schools. Charter schools are a sort of fad for the last 20 years all over the country. Nebraska has had sense enough not to get involved in it. But he pointed out that we really ought to be ashamed of how our kids do, particularly our African American kids. Our African American kids are tied with the African American kids in Alabama for the lowest scores in the nation. Now, I assumed that was true. I did not check it out, and I don't believe it one way or the other, but assuming it's true, I started looking at some information about the poverty level of kids in this city and the poverty level of black kids in Alabama. That's where we're tied. Now, I had a great-grandfather who fought in the Civil War. He volunteered with the 27th Massachusetts Volunteers. And when he moved to Nebraska, he was the guy that they would have speak on the 4th of July at the picnic. And I'm guessing that if he thought that Nebraska is treating its black children as badly as they're treated in Alabama, he'd be ashamed. I think we all ought to be. I think it's all worth examining. And I think that the legislature is a lot smarter now that that resignation has been accepted. Page 10. Page 10 is another examination that I made by requesting data of the Omaha Public Schools Research Office. Data. Research Office, yeah. I wanted to know of the kids who are in poverty as measured by the free or reduced lunch eligibility standard. Not in poverty if you don't qualify, in poverty if you qualify for the help. How many of those kids took the NESA exams, the state exams in a given year, and how they did? Because the first numbers we looked at on page 2 and 3 suggested that poor kids do bad in school. Well, the answer is the average of poor kids is a bad performance in school. It's a disappointing performance in school. But that doesn't apply to any particular kid. This suggests that of all these kids who took the NESA exam who were poor, a little over half of them were at or above the proficient line for, was it math? Yeah. And just under half of them were at or above the proficient line, all poor kids, in reading. Now, half might not seem very important to you. That might not be a very big deal. But let's take Omaha Public Schools. It has about 35,000 children who are impoverished, who live in impoverished homes. If half of those kids, let's say somewhere between 15,000 and 18,000. Oh, incidentally, I really like this. I'm taking this home to my mom's home to show her. She's 90 years old and she never imagined that I'd ever get up in front of a church group and get to talk. If the number is just 15,000 out of the 35,000 poor kids who attend Omaha Public Schools, I want you to think of what that means. The 5th largest school district in this state is Papillion-La Vista. It has 10,000 students. Some of them are poor, some of them are not. In Papillion, some of them succeed on the NESA test, and some of them don't. If we could draw a boundary around just the poor kids who succeed in school in Omaha, we would have a district that would be the 4th largest district in the state, 50% larger than the current 4th largest district, around 15,000 as opposed to 10, with 100% of them poor and 100% of them academically successful. I think that's a big deal. Now that doesn't answer the question, what about the others? And I think that's what you ought to be concerned about, and I think that's why you're here today. But you should not think that just because a high level of impoverished kids in school is a low performance of those kids in school. It's the average performance that's low, not the performance of individual kids. Half of them are doing fine. Let's see what else is here. Oh! What I do is, for the last 4 years, I'm just a very curious guy. And I have focused my curiosity on the looniness of school reform. And what we have done in this country in the name of school reform and in the name of trying to help kids. This is a list, just a short list. The full list is probably 4 or 5 pages long. A list of those proposals, particularly in Nebraska, that we assign, duties we assign to public schools that don't have anything to do with education. That have to do instead with substituting for decent parenting. Now, we could argue over whether that ought to be done or not, but I can tell you that every dime that is spent on suicide prevention training is not spent on education. Every dime that's spent on CPR training is not spent on education. And every dime that's spent on any of those things is not spent on education. But we don't think about that, partly because as citizens and as legislators, as members of the Nebraska Senate, we get to order schools what to do, and they have to do it. And they're very reluctant to resist because they like the idea of kids not committing suicide. They like the idea of kids having mental health or have parents involvement policies, etc. And so what we've done is, in addition to misperceiving what poverty means for these kids, we've also decided to make the schools social hospitals, to make sure that whatever's missing in their life by the accident of birth is replaced in part, at least, by the public elementary and secondary education institutions. I'm not going to talk very much about this, but whenever we find a miracle school, a school that has, say, lots of poverty and lots of good performance by its students, what we tend to find is that either it is fraud. Nebraska just had its first teacher punished for cheating on the state tests. That's just 1 out of 20,000, but would it surprise you? I was surprised by the first one. I won't be surprised by the second. There are 2 examples. One is Central Park Elementary in Omaha. The other one is Wasmer Elementary in Grand Island, subject of a World Herald Miracle School story. And it turns out that what's happening is parents of excellent children, able students, poor, are getting their kids into those schools, and the parents of less able kids are getting their kids out of those schools and having to send them to other schools. And it seems to be that such an occurrence as an explanation of a miracle school ought to give us pause when we start saying to schools, you have to improve. All they have to do to improve is improve the quality of their student body, and it works. Okay. Oh, I write rants. I try to make my rants rational. I try to make my rants based on facts. And I produced some of them for you because I think that they represent concepts that will be useful to you as you think about this problem. This particular rant, let's see what it was called. Are we comparing the wrong groups? Here's what I think we ought to be doing. Instead of comparing schools that have lots of non-poor kids with the performance of schools that have lots of very poor kids, we know the result. It's not news. What we ought to be doing, I think, is conducting research, and I don't know why none of the 16 state teacher training programs in this state does this kind of research. Let's take a look at that half of the poor kids in Omaha that did well on the NESA exam, and the other half that didn't do so well on the NESA exam, all poor. Let's split those up and find out what the differences are in those families. Why not examine a poor successful kid family with a poor unsuccessful kid's family? That's the argument that's in that rant. Things educators could say but don't. Educators are polite. And they're attracted to the business because they're humanely motivated. They think that people's behavior is a natural function of how they're treated. And that one of the ways you improve people's behavior is educate them. It's a positive treatment. And they love the idea that every kid can be saved. Every kid has the possibility of success, even though our experience for the last 50 years has practically no data that suggests that that's true. And as a consequence, because educators find that a very useful belief in the practice of their profession, they have to pretend like they believe it when they're not practicing their profession. And so they're relatively silent on this issue. I think that people at the teachers union ought to be complaining the way I do, ought to be ranting the way I do, but they don't. But the 3 things are, to parents, if you effectively raise your children before you send them to school, we can teach most of them. If you do not, we cannot. To legislators, do not order us to repair the developmental damage that is done to children before they reach school age. We cannot We cannot do so, and pretending otherwise wastes resources, damages K-12 education, and does nothing to help those innocent children who need and deserve it the most. And finally, for reformers, academic achievement gaps, robust and intractable, are well established long before the first day of kindergarten. I'd like to hear educators say those kinds of things. But whether they tend to think it or no, this is really important. You need to pull the hook when it's time. Thank you. We have been doing school reform in this country since 1965 with the passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Instead of deciding as part of the Great Society, what we were going to do was provide help to the families that needed it, whose kids were reaching school and not doing well. We decided to say to the teachers, fix this. Teachers didn't resist it, and they didn't fix it, because they have no capacity to fix it. They're just educators, but that's enough. I can't be somebody accused me in the introduction of being a whole person educator, something like that. I can't even educate myself. Education is it's practically a magic art. And those people that can do it they sort of blow me away, like the guy who was it in Chicago where he walked the tightrope between the two buildings?
Yeah.
That may be a silly activity, but I'm impressed by it because I can't do it. But I can't be a teacher, but those that can do a marvelous job. And we ought to really appreciate that. But we ought not give them orders to do things that are beyond their reach. That's just goofy. What's the last one there? Oh! You've heard all I have to say on teachers are not trained. They come to it naturally. Oh, let's see. Okay. This page is a mistake. Yeah, you're not going to hear me admit that very often. It turns out that 4th grade reading, 8th grade reading, it should be 4th grade math and 8th grade math. And when I constructed the thing electronically, I reproduced the top 2 for the bottom 2.
So what should be?
What? Reading. The top 2 and the bottom 2 are the same. But if I had done it right and put the math down here on the bottom, it would look the same. This is the result on what's called the National Report Card, which is the way the federal government decides how the schools are doing. It's called NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress, I believe. And the kids are divided into 3 groups for this. And this covers the first decade of No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind is the most recent version of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the big mistake of 1965, except they waited until 2001 to do it. And what you have in the red line, in each case, are the kids who don't qualify for any meal benefit. They may not be really affluent, but they're not poor. The second line in each case are those kids who qualify for reduced price meals. They're not as poor as it's possible to be, or not as poor as you can find, but they're less poor than the top line, the red line. And then the third line down in each case are those kids that qualify for completely free meals. They don't have to pay anything for them. The price is reduced from whatever the kids in top have to pay all the way to 0. What's interesting about this is that during this first 10 years of school reform, in its most recent version, nothing has changed. As a matter of fact, if you go to the next page, what I said was, let's take a look at how much the score is changing for the affluent kids, and how much the score is changing for the reduced price kids, and how much the score is changing for the free lunch kids. And it turns out that you can do a calculation by how much they each have changed in 10 years, and come up with this number over here about the annual change. Well, when the bottom number is larger than the top number, it means that eventually, if that continues, the two are going to grow ever so slowly together. And in the case of fourth grade reduced price kids against non-reduced price kids, that gap will close in 136 years. And in the case of the third one down, where it's reading, where the gap, the rate is going up faster, slightly, faster for the non-impoverished kids than it is for the impoverished kids, it will never close. So what I'm telling you is that when you look at those, 15 Nebraska school districts that I showed you first on, it's the same everywhere. That's what's going on. Kids, on average, who have financial resources at home tend strongly, on average, to do better than those kids that have less financial resources, and far better than those who have even less financial resources. Let me tell you about me. The first one, I'm not a shill for the teachers. I'm not here trying to tell you that these folks need to be worshipped. I think what they need to be is respected and appreciated, but I don't represent them. And in fact, I think I was picked because I don't represent them. Picked to speak today. I'm not trained or licensed to be a K-12 teacher. I spent a significant part of my life opposing the political efforts of teachers' unions in Nebraska. And I can tell you that I was more often successful at defeating their goofy proposals in the legislature than I was at failing to defeat their goofy proposals in the legislature. And if you ever have a chance to have a quiet, separate conversation with anybody who runs the Teachers Association, I think they will tell you that I was their most effective enemy. And I'm still here talking about education and how it's important to kids. K-12 education is just too important to a free society to be operated on irrational principles. And I think that what we've been doing for the last 50 years at least in trying to tell teachers fix everything that was messed up by the families is wrong and harms education and doesn't help the kids. 3 requests. Try to suppress your instinct for blame in this matter. Blame is political. Blame is power. Blame is emotion. And it very seldom leads to the right answer. It isn't a solution at all. I would suggest strongly to you that the reason that the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed in the first place, because the Democrats who ran Congress at the time couldn't bring themselves to say, the problem with these kids are they come from lousy families. They couldn't bring themselves to say that. So they said, oh, well, let's blame the teachers instead. Tell them to fix it. Try hard to think in terms of cause and effect. The nice thing about cause and effect is it's subject to reason. It is rational. It attempts to tease out the real cause for these problems that you guys are here to try to think about solving. And gives you a tool, if you ask the right questions to come up with the right cause and effect, gives you a tool to work with. Simply telling teachers to fix things won't work. I want you to pay the greatest attention to what you take home from me today. The facts I give you, not my opinions. You may have gathered, once I get started, there's nothing I love as much as the sound of my own voice. I think my opinions are fabulous. I think I am the smartest, well, not the smartest, among the smartest people I've ever met. But my belief doesn't make it so. And all I'm asking you guys to do is look at the facts, think about what facts matter in the lives of these children, and think about whether you can do something about it. Because we've abandoned, under Elementary and Secondary Education Act, 3 minutes to go. Okay. I'm not sure we're going to get to the slides. Okay, you've seen that, you've seen that, you've seen that. Oh, this isn't very pretty, but I don't know if I can get back to it. too many. Oh, okay. Okay. You remember the NAEP things with the non-poor kids, the sort of poor kids, and the real poor kids? This, left half of this, is what happened in, I think it was North Carolina. No, Montgomery County might be in Maryland. But you have the kids who, on the top row, it's the county, Montgomery County, fairly wealthy county, how they do. Then, how the state does. The kids in Montgomery County are wealthier, their families have more money than the average for the state. And then you have a particular school, Highland Elementary, which is filled with poor kids. And it's exactly what you would expect. The kids who live in the homes, more of whom live in homes with money resources, score better in school than those that don't. The state average is lower, and then this poor school is like this. But, starting here, this new principal, starting here something happened. Would anybody like to make a guess as to what happened?
Gentrification.
Jobs.
Poverty stayed the same. Any other thoughts? I think whoever said that's a good idea, and it often explains things. They got the community involved. There's a very positive one. Anybody else got a guess? They warmed up with respect to the people in the community and the teachers, the kids, and all that kind of stuff. Anything else? It qualified them for a national Blue Ribbon Award from the clowns at the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. Here's all they did. They just cheated. When you see that kind of change, it doesn't have anything to do with education. It has to do with changing. Now, let me get down the road here a ways. So I think there might be one or two things. Cryptozoology. People know what cryptozoology is? It's animals that don't exist. A unicorn. Okay? Another one. Loch Ness Monster. You've all heard that. Nobody's ever found it. Bigfoot. Out here in the West. Highly effective teachers. We've got a president of the State Board of Education in Nebraska who says we just have to find and develop more highly effective teachers. Persistently failing schools. In every case, you find highly effective teachers are teachers who are given able students to teach. And it doesn't matter what kind of teacher they happen to be in some moral sense. It matters how able their students are. This last one, persistently failing schools, that used to be a standard back when they were trying to enforce No Job Left Behind Act, where if your building failed or your district failed to meet the standards for so many years in a row, you got designated as among the worst schools in your state as a persistently failing school. There has never been a persistently failing school filled with affluent children ever, anywhere. The only persistently failing schools are schools that are essentially filled with kids who don't have the quality of life outside of school that other kids do who succeed in school. And it's hard not to believe that. Okay. I'll tell you what. I think I'm going to stop. You have helped me maintain a shred of dignity that I appreciate.
Thank you so much. I would guess there's going to be some energized conversation at your tables. From our panel and Rob. Each table has a kind of a guide for the conversation, and the question we're asking you to chew on a bit is, what did you hear that surprised you about the quality of life in our community from the panel from Bligh. And each table has a facilitator, so they'll get you going on this. And we're going to do this for 12, 13 minutes. I'll give you a couple minutes kind of warning to kind of close down your conversation. And then we'll have Q&A time again. So enjoy your time.
Students throughout the country. Anybody that had a math program worth a damn would enter their students in this. The 4 kids at UNO finished in the top 10% in the country. And I talked to Jack about it. They're Jack Heidel's students and his faculty students. And I said, what's going on there? And they said, oh, those are, was it Kiewit scholars? Is that what it's called? Yeah. These are kids where the Kiewit company or the Kiewit family or whatever gave them a mountain of money to hire undergraduate students. So that when they get Harvard quality students, they produce Harvard quality graduates. So there's lots of examples, and I appreciate yours.
Well, Doug made another point here.
Okay.
That I want to add to it, and it challenges all of us, frankly. He said the difference is in the students' attitude and the expectation of what they're going to get out of this course and what their expectation is, who they're going to be. He said at Harvard, Galbraith didn't have to spend any time on motivation, trying to get us to go back to work. All I had to do was look around that classroom, and I knew I had to work my tail off when I got back to the room. But at the university, there was a different expectation. And I would apply some of that to chatter. The panel was talking about our chatter. It affects the attitude of what we're doing. And Doug was agreeing with it. He said there's just an expectation in the Nebraska community that some of this isn't as important, that some of these things don't count, and well.
Doug is your son.
Yes.
Right? What's his name and what does he do?
Doug Cruz. He's on faculty at Rutgers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
And he was there when you were there, working in the legislature. But I wonder how we can challenge each other, and I wonder if you have any ideas to this from your research, to what I call chatter, to talk it up, to challenge each other, to challenge these parents. Now these parents are running out of energy and time. It's tough. But at the same time, we do have some level of confrontation with them.
When I skip the next 40 slides, because I never got to them. Here's 3 ideas for you. Number 1, focus on help for those children who need it. Remember that about half of Omaha's impoverished kids already succeed in school. The out-of-school lives of the poor children who fail need to be more like the out-of-school lives of the poor children who succeed. Number 2, consider creating a public scheme that recognizes and honors the impoverished parents of academically successful students. These people are real heroes in this community. They are guiding their children towards success despite bearing the daily burden of financial poverty. And finally, create a cadre of impoverished parents of academically successful children and pay them money to serve as mentors of those parents whose children are failing in school. And notice I didn't say the poor parents who are failing in school, because there are plenty of affluent kids who fail in school as well. They have taught themselves how to limit the developmental damage that poverty can inflict on children. Have them teach others. This community is filled with poor parents who are doing a bang-up job raising their kids. Their kids are getting to school and they're succeeding in life. They're getting jobs, they're doing what you expect. Most of them don't happen to be sort of pink-colored like me, but that shouldn't matter to anybody. Who's next? Jack.
I would like to ask you.
Wait.
Sure.
I want to ask you the same question publicly that you talked about infancy, but I know I'm a learning community as well as in the math department. But you mentioned Central Park Elementary in North Omaha as a school, we don't, it's doing an outstanding job, but now, and it is attracting motivated students because of families who care, who know it's doing a good job, and so they're sending their students there, and so it's attracting better students, and so it's doing a better job. But how did it get that way in the first place? In other words, it had to be doing something right in order to attract the good students. And so maybe if Central Park is doing something right, other schools can be doing the same thing.
Well, this search for doing something right in school, I think, is a phantom search. And here's why I say that. If there were magic tricks that worked, we wouldn't be holding this meeting because every kid in the country would be succeeding. Do you all recall about 25 years ago when a couple of physicists from the University of Utah announced that they had solved the problem? They were able to create energy at room temperature by fusion. Cold fusion. I think fusion, when it actually happens, like in the sun, it's like 10 million degrees. And they were able to do it within the limits of the thermometer on the wall. It turns out that lots of scientists thought, hey, let's follow what they do and see what we can learn from it. Nobody was able to reproduce it. If there were ever secret formulas, they would be replicable. There aren't any that I know of. And every time I ask people to produce a secret formula, what are you doing that makes a difference? You find out that it's something else. You remember the World Herald Story series a couple of Mays ago, where they said, we have gone out and interviewed and examined the records at public schools like OPS, who are successful. And we've asked them what they do to be successful. Well, it turns out there's a number of problems with that. They weren't all measured on the same success scale. But let's assume that they were all more successful than you would expect for an urban community filled with poor kids. The idea that you can say to somebody, you're successful, what's causing it? And they say, gosh, we've got very good leaders in our principalship. We've got teachers who are selected for academic excellence. We've got guidance counseling that is warm and cuddly and friendly and everything you want a child to experience in school. We got this, we got this, we got this, we got high expectations. That answer may be true, and the observation that they were doing a good job may be true. That is, the kids are doing better than expected. What's missing is the causal connection. If you really wanted to test what those features of these successful urban schools, whether they meant anything, whether they had any meaning at all, you would get a list of what those characteristics were. And then you go out shopping for a random selection of school districts that try those features. And then you'd see whether they were successful everywhere, or whether they were successful half the time, or a third of the time, or 10% of the time, or that the teachers were changing the grades on the state tests. That's what science requires. I don't know what those folks were doing. I suspect that they're very highly motivated teachers. They have a principal who is or was a bang-up salesman. Because what all parents believe, what we all want to believe, and that is that schools can make a difference. If you can convince them, even if it's wrong, that that school is better, the parents who care are going to try to get their kids in there. I didn't send my daughter, I sent my daughter to college at Trinity University. First of all, I only had one kid. We had two salaries, and so we could afford to do that. But I picked that, and she picked that, because of its reputation for academic excellence. After she was there 4 years, graduated, Phi Beta Kappa, blah, 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 I talked to her about her fellow students. And she said, oh, they're all like me. Well, I could run a college successfully if the students were all students like my daughter was. And that's what they do. And they do. They have a fabulous reputation, and they accomplish it. And I'm telling you, those kinds of things are happening inside of our public schools. But they're happening when the kids are raised. That's my theory. So if Central Park Elementary wants to say, here's what we did, then everybody ought to be doing it. And if they're keeping it a secret so that nobody else can do it, I doubt that it exists. I hope I wasn't too nasty in my response, Jack. Thank you. That's it? You've enjoyed as much of this as you can stand.